You're listening to Release Your Resistance with Bex Beltran, episode 116. Welcome to Release Your Resistance. This is Bex. The only reason why any of us don't have what we want in life is because of our own resistance. Right now, I'm learning how to recognize and release my resistance, and this podcast tells you how you can release your resistance so that you can live the exact life that you want. Let's get started. Welcome to Season 4 of the Release Your Resistance podcast. I am super excited for the next 8 episodes. I'm always excited for all of the episodes, of course, but for the beginning of this new year, and to ground myself in a topic that has been so meaningful to me over the past 2 years, I thought I would invite you along on a surrender journey with me here in January and February of 2023. This is a first for me in this podcast. I am pairing one of my notebooks with a series of podcast episodes so that you can follow along. You can listen. You can hold a journal in your hands and read along. And then you can also reflect and write, and later you can read what you wrote. I think we've got all the major learning styles covered there. The year before last, I created a workbook called the Surrender Study Guide. It's kind of like a school workbook. It's 8.5 by 11. The cover is bright and colorful. The inside is black and white. It has a lot of worksheets and activities to do, and it is large print, by the way. And last year, I reworked that workbook into more of a journal. And the new journal is called Let Go and Surrender. And this is more of a traditional journal size and look. It has a more muted, feminine, floral kind of cover that is matte instead of glossy. The journal still has all the same content as the workbook, but the questions and prompts are written more in a journaling format so that you have much more space because you are writing more long-form answers as you consider the prompts and the concepts and ideas. So for the next 8 weeks, let's take one section each week and work through this Let Go and Surrender journal together. And by the way, you do not need this specific journal. I would love for you to get it, but you can just use your own current journal to write your thoughts about what I am sharing or to do some of the prompts and exercises that I will share in these episodes. You can use whatever journal or paper you currently have. Or if journaling is not your thing, these next 8 weeks are still for you. You can just think about what I'm sharing without writing anything down. There are so many options and there are so many ways to do this. I want to give you a reintroduction or maybe a first introduction to letting go and surrender. And I'm using these phrases interchangeably. I am not differentiating between when we let go or when we surrender. If you know of a reason to keep them separate and distinct in your mind, please continue to do so. And if you prefer the phrase letting go because surrender makes you think of giving up or submitting to someone or something, then by all means use letting go and not surrender. I asked a friend what came to mind when she heard the terms letting go and surrender, and she brought up some very interesting examples that I would have not thought of, but are so relevant. So I will share them with you in case they wouldn't have occurred to you either. My friend's first association with letting go and surrender is in yoga, when the teacher suggests a pose and encourages you to just let go in that pose. For example, in child's pose. What are you letting go of? Physically, you're letting go of any tension or rigidity in your body, any need to hold anything up. You are stretching out and allowing yourself just to melt into the floor. Mentally, you may be letting go of whatever you are worrying or stressing or thinking about. You may just relax into a child's pose and clear your mind completely. and I'm inviting you to consider surrendering and letting go with me so you can stretch out, relax, and release any tension or worry. Starting today, we are going to break down the concepts of learning how and why to surrender, and we will go week by week, just like the workbook and the journal are set up. What is letting go? The mantra that I shared in last week's gentle journaling check-in email, that is also the very first prompt in the Let Go and Surrender journal, is learning and practicing surrender in an intentional way can reprogram your brain and change your life. What do you think about reprogramming your brain and changing your life? Have you ever considered that the way to do those things would be to let go? The best way that I can describe letting go is an actual physical metaphor of actually letting go of something. Imagine that you are holding on to something. Maybe it's awkward to hold or heavy, or maybe it is tiny, so you need to really pinch your fingers together and tense them tightly to hold on to it. This holding and grasping is resisting gravity. If you weren't exerting force and creating friction with your fingertips, the item would drop to the ground. Depending on how long you decide to hold, or in other words, resist gravity, you might develop a cramp in your hand. You might start to feel tired. The pain from your grip might make it hard for you to focus on anything else. That is what resistance does. It causes suffering. It makes you tired. It is more difficult to focus on other things while you are resisting. Letting go is just opening your hand. Right now, do this with me. Grip your fingers tightly into a point as if you are holding something with your fingertips. Grip them, tighten them, and now release. Stretch out your fingers and spread them wide apart. Doesn't that feel good? Doesn't that feel better than gripping? And notice this, if you hold your hands palm up, you can still hold something in your hand without gripping and tensing. Your palm up open hand is also a perfect place to receive something being handed to you. Or you could tilt your hand and let something fall from your hand into someone else's open hand so they can receive it as you surrender it. Surrender is not intuitive. We are not taught the benefits of letting go through our education, through marketing and entertainment, or our family structures, or through society. In fact, we are taught to try to control and to set goals and to hold on and to figure things out in advance so that they do go a certain way. We know there is no universal one-size-fits-all answer, but because of our upbringing, because of our brains' programming to conserve energy and to stay in the familiar, we don't intuitively know that we can just let those expectations go. We don't realize that we can surrender. When we learn and practice the concepts of letting go and surrender, we can reprogram our brains. And through that reprogramming, we can drop so much expectation, so much disappointment, so much grasping energy, and so much friction. We can drop all of those things that are currently creating a less than desirable experience. And by dropping those types of things, we change our lives. Just on a personal note, finding and practicing this work is work and practice. While I have seen and I do believe that you can hear a concept and it can rearrange everything in your brain in an instant and you'll never be the same after, I also know that we can learn a concept and understand it logically, but need many tries and attempts and opportunities to change our habits and pattern thinking to really implement and embody a new concept. I am overcoming a lot of habits and patterns that I grew up with and that I thought were part of my identity. Learning to surrender and let go is something that you actually have to intentionally plug in and replace old things with. But since I have done this work, I do think I feel more relaxed. I feel more at ease. I am more calm. I see myself going with the flow. Often I notice I am not being bothered by things that might have previously ruined my day. I like myself better. I like my life better. I am more optimistic. I am more hopeful. These are all things that I want for you. I do think you can have these by learning to let go and practicing surrender in your life. I have a number of episodes that I recorded back in 2021 all about my journey into surrender, and I will link them all in the show notes for this episode at bexb.org/letgo. That's bexb.org/letgo. The first episode is called Odds and Ends. It was my very first little step into this work. I did not know what was ahead of me and how my way of thinking was about to change. You can kind of hear the new, fresh curiosity in my voice in that episode. Another episode was called Learning to Surrender. In that one, I talk mostly about my own questions about surrender. In 2021, I hosted a surrender study group where we had about 100 people in a Facebook group, and then about 8 to 10 people would show up weekly for our Zoom discussions. I believe the best way to learn something is to teach it. So during those 8 weeks of the surrender study group, I really got more clear on my own ideas and concepts, and I got to hear other people's perspectives and examples and stories. So I really appreciated everyone who participated in those 8 weeks. So after the study group and after a second group that I facilitated that summer called Surrender Summer Camp, I recorded the Surrender Check-In episode where I share more of what I learned through my research, through the study group, and through the Surrender Summer Camp. And that was actually the reason why I created the Surrender Study Guide. So while we are talking about resources, I'll share with you kind of a funny coincidence. In that same conversation, when my friend told me that she immediately thought of yoga when I brought up the topic of letting go and surrendering, I asked her what resources she would be seeking out if she were trying to learn more about this topic. She said she would want a community, not a class, not a program, but a group of people who were all interested in the topic and who all wanted to discuss and learn from each other. And she said that ideally it wouldn't have a teacher, but more like a facilitator who would guide the conversations and share the tools. And that description exactly matched that surrender study group that I hosted in the spring of 2021. And I had the same reasons that she mentioned for inviting people to join me. So there's another example of great minds think alike. If you are following along in the Let Go and Surrender journal, or if you will be once you get it, there is space for you to write some notes about resources. So think about what resources would be most helpful for you to learn about letting go and surrender. If you like the idea of being in a group, maybe you could invite a few friends to learn this work together. And if you like the idea of light accountability, you can decide to follow along with me each week and fill in the relevant pages in the journal as we go. If you are interested in finding more formal and traditional teachers like authors and books and podcasts, I have some recommendations for you too. My own favorite surrender teachers include Michael Singer and Tosha Silver, and there were many more. I've discussed their books, their podcast interviews, and lessons in the podcast episodes that I just mentioned. I'm hoping you'll use this episode and the next 7 episodes to help you learn and consider and practice letting go. I hope you'll use the Let Go and Surrender journal because another of my favorite beliefs is the answers you seek are inside of you. So yes, I want to share my journey with you and share what has worked for me and what I have learned through my research. And at the same time, I know you will learn so much as you write down what you think and what you notice and what you become aware of when you think about and hear about these topics. Why should we learn to surrender? Why should we practice letting go? Because you can live a more calm, peaceful, less stressful life by letting go. So think about that for a moment. How would your life look if it were more calm, more peaceful, and less stressful? One of the tools that is so meaningful and helpful as I was learning about surrender was to read an intentional message to myself every day. I used Tosha Silver's Full Abundance Change Me prayer, but I called it a poem, and you could use the Serenity Prayer or a song lyric or some kind of verse or passage. As I was reading it to myself daily as the days progressed, I actually ended up modifying and adding to and replacing words in Tosha's writing that I was using. Then I decided to come up with my own fresh new message, which I will share with you here in case you want to use it, to read it to yourself every day, or to use it as an inspiration to write your own message. The general advice is to find a poem, a prayer, a passage, or lyric, or some collection of words that when you read them, you do feel the possibility of letting go. After you hear mine, you can repeat it to yourself. You can change some words so that it fits with your style better. Whatever you end up using, see if you can repeat it to yourself and see the changes in you as you hear those repetitive suggestions day after day. Letting go and surrender. Let me surrender. Let me remember that all of my needs are met. Let me remember to be excited and joyful. Let me be intentional. Let me be open and gentle with myself and others. I can express myself. I know others will see me how they see me. Let me remember my inner wisdom is always present. Let life show me its divine mysteries. Let me feel whole. Let me surrender. When you hear those suggestions and ideas, what comes up for you? Do you notice any resistance? Do you feel any disagreement? Was anything that you just heard unavailable to you? That might be your first area for surrender and letting go. I really like thinking about energy in the form of chakras as a metaphor. Whether or not you believe our energy is tied to the greater energy through these spinning centers aligned in our bodies, you can think about the different areas of life and existence and your search for enlightenment through the order of the chakras. Consider the 7 chakras as a kind of checklist for yourself. Run through the list of them to let yourself notice where your energy might be blocked or where you may not be fully allowing or accepting. I like the idea that the chakras start at the root, and each of the chakras has a different meaning or purpose associated with it. So as far as the meanings or associations go, the first one, the root chakra, is about basic security. And then we move up to creativity, and then power, and will, and then love, then communication and intuition, and finally, your crown chakra is all about enlightenment. As I was learning about chakras, I noticed a parallel or some similarities between the hierarchy of the chakras and their meanings and Maslow's hierarchy. Remember from Psych 101 when we learned about Maslow's hierarchy? You can imagine a pyramid, and at the very base of the pyramid, at the ground level of the pyramid, where the root chakra would be, that is your basic survival needs. That's air, water, food, and shelter. And then as you move up the hierarchy, the rungs in the ladder of that pyramid, you go up to safety and security, love and belonging, esteem, and then wholeness or self-actualization. I find that pyramid so relevant when we are thinking about ourselves and our willingness and ability to surrender. If we are sure and we know and we trust that our basic needs are met, so thinking about the root chakra and our basic needs, the bottom rung of Maslow's hierarchy, about air and water and food and shelter, if we know we have what we need, it gives us the space to relax and release and surrender. We know we are fine. We know there is a roof over our head. We know we have food, shelter. We know we have air to breathe. If you ground yourself in that assurance, you may have more willingness and ability to let go a little. This coming week, before next week's episode, I want you to think about any questions, confusion, fear, or resistance that might come up about surrender. At least write them down and try to answer them for yourself. You can also email any questions or confusion to me if you like at hi@bexby.org. I also want to offer you a few journal prompts that you can think about this week. If you have the journal, you can answer the prompts right there in the journal. If you don't have the journal, you can just pause this episode and write these prompts into your own journal, or even a piece of paper is fine. And of course, you don't even have to write them. Just thinking about them works too. The first prompt is what I was just talking about with the bottom rung of Maslow's hierarchy and the root chakra. Haven't my needs always been met? If you think about your life, the best parts and the tough times, haven't your needs always been met? Or have you learned and grown and developed and experienced things when you thought or knew that your needs were not being met? Another question to think about is, in what ways or areas of my life am I already in abundance? Then in contrast to that, in what areas of my life do I want to be in abundance? And finally, how do I feel about surrendering? If you want to do an art project this week, you could draw a self-portrait of yourself with your feet firmly planted in the ground. Write the caption as, "This is me, whole, safe, and grounded." If you do decide to do that art project, I would love for you to share it with me. And in just under 3 weeks, I will be hosting an in-person workshop and discussion here in Gilbert, Arizona. It is called Why Surrender and How to Let Go. We will be talking more about how to practice surrender, and I will share some specific activities that you can use and consider for yourself. Plus, we will get that community aspect as a resource that I mentioned earlier. You can bring your own questions and insights, and we will get to hear what we all think about surrender and letting go, and maybe practice some of the activities together. So if you are in Arizona, please mark your calendar for Tuesday, January 24th at 5:30 p.m. in Gilbert. You can find all the details on my website at bexby.org/letsmeet. You can click on the link to RSVP because space is limited. That is it for today. Thank you so much for spending this time with me to hear about letting go. Next week, we will be talking about specific activities to practice surrender. And that is going to be section 2 of the Let Go and Surrender Journal. Thanks again. I will talk with you next week. You know what I'm really good at? Asking questions, then listening to the answer and redirecting you if you didn't answer, then showing you your thoughts from how you answered. That is part of what coaching with me is like. I don't have an agenda for you. I don't think I know better than you. I do believe in you and your capacity. If you tell me what you want for yourself, I believe it. I can see it for you. I can show you the thoughts that are keeping you from getting what you want. Then you can drop those thoughts and go get what you want. Coaching really works. Come to my site at bexby.org/coaching and book a session with me. This has been Release Your Resistance. Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Also, think about someone who you know who would love this episode and share it with them. There should be a share button on your app if you're listening to this on your phone. If you'd like to continue this conversation one-on-one or in real time, come visit me on my site at bexby.org to see how we can work together.